The phone rang just as I was doing the dishes after dinner. My hands were soapy, but I rushed to the phone, nearly slipping on the wet floor. In recent months, I had taken any call, even from phone scammers, because each time I hoped to hear the cherished words from the hospital. How many times had I run to the phone with a sinking heart and then heard an offer to buy a vacuum cleaner or take out a loan? But today, the voice on the phone was different. "Hello, is this Irma Crowley?" asked a man's voice with that professional politeness that you immediately recognize in medical institutions. "Yes, I'm listening," I answered, wiping my damp hands on my apron and feeling my heart start to beat faster, not from excitement, but from the hope I'd been carefully suppressing for the past 6 months. "This is St. Mary's Cardiac Ward. We have an opening for your surgery. Can you come in for hospitalization on Friday morning?" I slumped into the chair by the phone, my legs suddenly feeling woozy. Friday is 3 days from now. 3 days until the moment I'd been waiting 6 months for. The mitral valve surgery that Dr. Paxton had called necessary, but which still couldn't get through the waiting list in the crowded hospital system. I remember him explaining to me 6 months ago that the valve wasn't working the way it should, that the heart was wearing out trying to compensate for the deficiency. I remember him drawing a diagram on a piece of paper, showing me exactly where the problem was. "Yes, of course," I heard my own voice, surprisingly calm for such a moment. "What time should I come in?" 8 o'clock in the morning at the emergency room. "Bring your passport, insurance, and a list of medications you're taking. The surgery is scheduled for Monday. If you cancel or don't show up, the next slot won't be available for another 6 months. 6 months. 6 more months of living with this constant feeling of shortness of breath, with chest pains that come in waves, especially at night. 6 more months of counting the steps up to the third floor and stopping at every landing, pretending I was just looking out the window at the neighbor's yard. 6 more months of waking up in the middle of the night from being short of breath and sitting on the edge of the bed, waiting for my breath to come back. "I will," I said firmly. "I will be there. Do you have a list of tests?" "All the tests are valid. We checked. We got the latest results 2 weeks ago from Dr. Paxton. Just show up at the appointed time. We'll be waiting for you." "Thank you," I breathed out. "Thank you so much. Goodbye, Mrs. Crowley. Good luck to you." After I hung up the phone, I sat down on the couch and tried to make sense of what was happening. At last. After all these months of waiting, after endless calls to the receptionist asking about the progress of the queue, after nights spent wondering if I would live to see my operation, now everything is about to change. In a week, I would have a heart that worked properly. I would be able to walk up the stairs without panting, and I would be able to sleep without waking up from an attack. Outside the window, the light rain that was so common in Harrisonburg at this time of year was drizzling. Gray clouds hung low over the rooftops, and puddles formed on the sidewalks, reflecting the yellow leaves, an ordinary fall day that suddenly became special. I glanced at my watch. It was 3:30. Dwayne was at work now, but this news couldn't wait. I got up and walked over to the window, looking out at the familiar view. The same yard, the same trees, the same playground where little Dwayne used to play. How many times had I stood at that window, watching him slide down the slide or swing on the swings? He was so open then, so attached to me, running home with any scratch, telling me everything that was going on at school, sharing secrets. The first thing I had to do was call my son, my only child, now 38 years old, who still remains to me, the boy who brought home found kittens and begged me to keep them. In the last 5 years, though, since he married Charlene, our relationship has become somewhat strained, formal. He used to call every few days, stop by on the weekends, and we'd have dinner together and talk about everything. Now our conversations were reduced to short, obligatory calls on Sundays and infrequent visits on holidays. I dialed his office number and waited for the receptionist to connect me to him. The familiar voice of the girl who was always polite but cold, probably instructed not to distract her superiors with personal calls. Mom, hi. Dwayne's voice sounded a little surprised. Is something wrong? That's the first thing he asks. Something's wrong. Like I only call him in emergencies. Although, to be fair, maybe I do. Our conversations have become so infrequent and dry lately that every call really does feel like something out of the ordinary. When did we become strangers who only communicate out of necessity? Dwayne, great news. I tried to put as much joy in my voice as I could. I just got a call from the hospital. There's an opening and the surgery's on Monday. I'll go to bed Friday morning. Pause. Too long a pause for good news. I could hear the office buzzing in the background, keyboard tapping, someone on the phone, a printer working. The usual office hustle and bustle that he spends most of his life in. That's good, Mom, he finally said, but there was no enthusiasm in his voice, more like confusion, as if my news had taken him by surprise. Are you sure you're ready? Maybe it's worth another consultation, a better examination? I mean, heart surgery is a big deal. Dwayne, we talked about this a month ago. I reminded him, trying not to show my disappointment at his reaction. Dr. Paxton says we can't put it off. The valve keeps collapsing, the heart keeps wearing out, and if I miss this opportunity, the next one won't be for another 6 months. You realize I might not wait. Yes, of course you're right. He was quiet again, and I could sense some tension in his voice. Something was wrong. Look, Mom, what about the costs? The surgery isn't cheap, and even with insurance, you're going to have to pay a lot of extra. I read on the internet, procedures like this cost tens of thousands. That's it. It always ends up being about money. Not how I was feeling, not whether I was nervous about major surgery, not whether I was scared to be in the hospital alone. Money. Like that's the main thing he's worried about with his mom's surgery. I have savings, Dwayne, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Your father left a good insurance policy, plus what we've been saving all our lives. Robert and I have always been prudent people. Don't worry about that. Of course, he agreed hastily. I just wanted to see if there was any help. We can add something if we need to. A woman's voice came from the background. Charlene. She spoke softly, but I could still hear the intonation annoyed, irritated. Dwayne covered the phone with his hand, but I could still hear bits of it. Now? Really? How much is this going to cost? We were planning on renovating. He shouted at his wife, but it was too late. I heard every word. So they were planning a renovation, probably with the money they thought they'd inherit, and my surgery disrupts their plans. I'm sorry, Mom. Dwayne's voice came closer, taking his hand off the microphone. It's just a little work situation. Look, it's really great that you got the call. Charlene and I will be sure to visit you at the hospital. Okay, I said, trying not to show my disappointment. I just want to warn you that I'm only going to turn my phone off during the surgery. The rest of the time, don't hesitate to call. Sure, Mom. Take care of yourself, and good luck with the prep. I gotta run to the meeting. Bye, son. Bye. Bye. After he hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. There was something wrong with his reaction. Any normal son would be happy that his mother finally got the chance to have the surgery that could prolong her life. And Dwayne sounded like I'd given him some bad news, like my treatment was some kind of problem that needed to be addressed. Maybe he's just worried. Heart surgery is really serious, and there are always risks. Any anesthesia at my age is dangerous. Any surgery can give complications. Or maybe he's really worried about money. Even though I said I had the means, he knows that Robert and I have the lion's share of our savings in an account that should go to him and his family when I die. I got up and went into the kitchen to finish the dishes. My hands were shaking, whether from the excitement of the operation or from the premonition that something was going wrong in our family. The plates clinked against each other as I put them in the dryer. Ordinary household chores that suddenly seemed so important. Maybe because you don't know when you'll be able to do them again in your own kitchen. Outside the window, the rain intensified, and I thought it would be nice not to have it on Friday when I had to go to the hospital. Who cares if it's rain or sunshine, though? The important thing was that things would finally begin. A new life in which I will be able to breathe fully and not dread every climb up the stairs. But why do I feel anxiety instead of joy? And why did Dwayne's voice sound so strange when I told him about my surgery? The next 2 days flew by like a blur. I made a list of things I needed to take to the hospital, going over it 10 times, adding slippers, an extra robe, a book I'd been meaning to read for a while. Thursday morning, I went to the polyclinic to take the last of the tests that were required before surgery. The line at the lab was long, as always. I sat down on a squeaky plastic chair and watched the people around me. An elderly woman with a cane was complaining to a neighbor about back pain. A young mother was trying to calm a crying baby. A middle-aged man was nervously leafing through a newspaper without reading. We are all here for the same reason. Something in our bodies is not working the way it should, and we all hope the doctors can fix it. When it was my turn, the nurse was a friendly woman in her 50s with kind eyes. "Are you preparing for surgery?" she asked, putting a tourniquet on my arm. "Yes, on Monday. For my heart." "Oh, I see. Don't worry. They do such operations very well now. The technology is very different than it used to be." She deftly drew blood from the vein, put a Band-Aid on, and smiled at me. "Good luck to you. And don't be nervous. Stress is bad for you. It's easy to say don't stress. But she's right, of course." I nodded gratefully and went home, clutching in my hand the directions for an electrocardiogram and chest X-ray. In the EKG room, I was admitted by a young doctor who looked younger than my son. He silently attached the sensors to my chest and started up the machine. The machine was writing something, drawing its mysterious lines, and I lay still and thought about how quickly the world was changing. When I was his age, there were no such machines. "Everything's normal," he said as he removed the sensors. "I mean, given your diagnosis, the surgery will be good for you?" The x-rays were quick, too. I stood behind the machine, held my breath on command, and in a minute everything was ready. I wasn't shown the scans, only told that the results would be sent to the hospital. On the way home, I stopped by the pharmacy to buy the compression stockings Dr. Paxton had recommended. The pharmacist, an older man in a white coat, took a long time sizing me up and explaining how to wear them properly. "Make sure you wear them after surgery," he instructed me. "Blood circulation needs to be maintained, especially in the first few days." At home, I laid out all the purchases on the bed: stockings, new slippers with non-slip soles, a robe, which I bought especially for the hospital, comfortable with pockets. I added old, tried-and-true things: a favorite nightgown Robert had once given me for my birthday, a book of Frost's poems I'd reread in times of need, a photograph of my husband and me taken in Yellowstone 10 years ago. Looking at these simple objects spread out on the bed, I suddenly felt loneliness acutely. Robert had always been there for moments like this. When I had gallbladder surgery 15 years ago, he had stayed by my bedside, holding my hand, reading the newspaper aloud, telling me silly anecdotes he'd heard at the machine shop. And now I have to go through this alone. No, not exactly alone. There's Dwayne, my son, who promised to visit me in the hospital. But somehow that thought didn't bring me any comfort. In recent years, our relationship had become formal, strained, and I knew exactly when that changed. 5 years ago, Dwayne brought Charlene home and announced they were getting married. I'd been overjoyed at the time, My son was already 33, and I was beginning to worry that he'd remain a bachelor. Charlene was beautiful, smart, worked as a manager in a large company. At first glance, the perfect daughter-in-law. But I soon realized that Charlene viewed the world through the lens of profit. For her, people were divided into useful and useless, and relationships were based on calculation. She never said anything overtly rude, always polite, but I could feel the coldness in her eyes when she looked at me. The first alarm bell rang before the wedding. Dwayne and I were sitting in the kitchen discussing plans for the celebration, and Charlene was studying my apartment as if appraising the property. "Nice location," she said, standing at the window. "And the square footage isn't bad. It's expensive in this neighborhood." "Yeah, Robert and I were lucky to get it when prices were different," I said. "It's a good layout. You could combine the kitchen and living room, do modern renovations," she went on, as if I were dead and she owned the apartment. Dwayne glared at her, but I remembered the conversation, and there were many other little things like that added up to an unpleasant picture. After the wedding, my son's visits became less frequent. He used to stop by a couple times a week, sometimes just to drink tea and talk. Now he appeared only on holidays, and even then, not always. Last year at Easter, they didn't come at all. Charlene had an important meeting with clients. Gradually, I began to notice that Dwayne was different when he was with his wife, more reserved, more careful with his words. He stopped telling me about his problems at work, about his plans, about what was bothering him. Our conversations were reduced to exchanging generalities about the weather and his health. And then there were those moments when Charlene thought I couldn't hear her conversations with her husband, like the time they came to my birthday party 3 years ago. I went into the kitchen to get a cake and heard her whispering to Dwayne in the living room, "How much longer do we have to waste time with these visits? She's doing fine on her own." "Charlene, this is my mother," Dwayne answered, but there was no firmness in his voice. "I understand, but we could make the weekend worthwhile. We have so many plans, so much to do." I pretended I hadn't heard, but Charlene's words were a thorn in my side. It's like she considers her time with me a waste, or the time 2 years ago when I fell at home and bruised my leg. I called an ambulance, but it turned out to be nothing serious, just a bruise. Dwayne arrived when the doctors had already left, brought medicine, helped around the house, and the next day I overheard him on the phone with his wife. "No, it was nothing. I didn't have to go to the hospital. Yeah, I realized you have a presentation." She just sounded so scared on the phone. "Well, we'll definitely be home tomorrow night." There was a sort of excusing tone in his voice, as if he was apologizing for wasting time on his mother. Slowly but surely, I was becoming a burden to them. Not a burden heavy enough to openly talk about it, but noticeable enough that every request on my part was perceived as an inconvenience. And now that I needed surgery that cost a lot of money, I heard that familiar note in Dwayne's voice again. Not joy that Mom was finally getting help, but worry about how much it would cost and how it would affect their plans. I closed my suitcase and set it by the door. I'd have to get up early tomorrow morning to make it to the hospital by 8. The phone was silent. Dwayne never called again, never asked how I was doing, never asked if I needed help getting ready. In the evening, I tried to read, but my thoughts were scattered. I turned on the TV, but I couldn't watch anything longer than 5 minutes. In the end, I went to bed early, but I lay in the dark for a long time, listening to my own heartbeat. Tomorrow, a new chapter of my life would begin. I wanted to believe that it would be better than the previous one. It was raining outside the window, tapping monotonously on the glass. The same rain that had fallen the day before yesterday when the hospital called. It had seemed like a good omen then, but now it was just a reminder that time was running out, and tomorrow I would have to face something unknown and frightening. But I'll get through it. I always have. Friday morning began with the alarm clock ringing at 7:30. I woke up immediately, even though I hadn't been able to sleep for a long time the night before. I tossed and turned in bed all night, listening to my own heartbeat and thinking that in a few hours I would be in the hospital. Sleep came in fragments, interspersed with anxious half-dreams, in which the fragments of conversations with doctors, the sounds of hospital corridors, and the faces of strangers in white coats intermingled. It was still dark outside the window. Street lights illuminated the empty sidewalks covered in a thin layer of frost. November in Harrisonburg had always been a dreary month, no autumnal beauty, no winter freshness, just a gray off-season when nature was preparing for a long sleep. But today, even this unsightly picture outside the window couldn't spoil my mood. It was finally the day I'd been waiting for 6 months. I got up, showered, and put on the comfortable clothes the hospital had advised me to wear. No jewelry, minimal metal objects, everything simple and practical. I had an easy breakfast, oatmeal with honey and tea without sugar. I didn't want to eat much, and before the operation, it was better not to overload the body. My suitcase had been at the door since the evening, ready to go. I checked the contents once again: documents in a separate folder, medicines in a plastic container, personal belongings neatly folded. Everything was in place. I hadn't forgotten anything. At 7:30 in the morning, I dialed Dwayne's number. I knew he got up early to be at work by 9, so the call shouldn't have woken him up. "Hello," he answered after the third beep. His voice was sleepy, disgruntled. "Good morning, Dwayne. It's Mom. I'm going to the hospital in an hour, and I wanted to say goodbye." "Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry, I'm not fully awake yet. How's it going? You excited?" "A little, but mostly glad it's finally starting. You remember the surgeries on Monday, right?" "Of course I remember. Hey, Mom, how are you getting there? You taking a cab?" "Yeah, I already ordered one. The driver will be here at 8:30. "That's good. And He stopped talking, and I heard the TV on in the background. "Mom, I have a very important presentation at the office today. I won't be able to see you off, but I'll be sure to visit you this weekend." I felt the familiar prick of disappointment, but I tried not to show it in my voice. "Of course, son. I know work is important. Thanks for understanding. Good luck, Mom. It's gonna be okay." "Goodbye, Dwayne." Bye. Take care." I hung up and stood by the phone for a few minutes, staring at my reflection in the dark TV screen. An older woman in a gray cardigan, with neatly combed hair and tired eyes. That's what I've become in recent years. Gray, unnoticeable, not much needed even by my own son. But today is not the time for sad thoughts. Today, a new life begins. The cab arrived exactly at the appointed time. The driver, a man in his 50s with a good-natured face, helped me carry my suitcase to the car. "To St. Mary's Hospital?" he said as he got into the driver's seat. "Yes, to the main entrance, please." "For the operation?" "Yes." "Don't worry, the doctors there are good. My father-in-law was operated on 2 years ago, and he's as young as ever. Cab drivers in small towns always know the stories of all their passengers and are willing to share their optimism. Usually it's annoying, but today his words seemed like a good sign to me. The drive to the hospital took 20 minutes. We drove down familiar streets, past stores that hadn't opened yet, past bus stops where people were already gathered, hurrying to work. Just an ordinary Friday in an ordinary city. And for me, a day that would divide life into before and after. St. Mary's Hospital was one of the most modern medical facilities in Harrisonburg, a 5-story red brick building with large windows and neatly trimmed shrubs along the main entrance. Automatic doors, a spacious lobby with marble floors, and fresh flowers in tubs. Everything was arranged so that patients felt they were not in a state institution, but in a place where they were cared for. I paid the driver, took my suitcase, and went to the information desk. Behind the counter sat a young girl in a blue uniform with the badge Administrator. "Good morning," she said with a professional smile. "What can I do for you?" "I'm here for a hospitalization. Irma Crowley, cardiac ward. Go to the emergency room, third floor, elevator to the right. They'll get you checked in." The elevator went up slowly, stopping at each floor. On the second floor, a woman came in with a bouquet of flowers, probably to visit a relative. On the third, an elderly man on crutches accompanied by his adult daughter, each with their own story, each with hope for recovery. The emergency room greeted me with the smell of disinfection and the quiet hum of voices. Several people sat in the waiting area, some filling out paperwork, some just waiting silently for their turn. There was a line of 3 people at the registration desk. I stood in the tail and waited patiently. In front of me was a woman in her 60s with a fractured arm. She spent a long time explaining to the receptionist how the accident had happened, complaining about the pain, and asking me to send her to a doctor as soon as possible. She was followed by a middle-aged man who spoke very quietly, and I couldn't make out what problem he was having. Finally, it was my turn. Behind the counter sat a woman in her 40s with short dark hair and a serious expression. Her name tag said, "Nurse Administrator Maria Tolkins." "Good morning," she said without looking up from her computer. "Last name? First name?" "Crawley Irma. I'm for a routine admission to the cardiac unit." The nurse began typing on the keyboard, staring at the monitor screen. A few seconds passed. She frowned and started typing again. "Crowley, you say? How do you spell the name?" "Irma, Crowley." She typed something again, then stopped and looked at me carefully. "And the date of birth?" "March 23rd, 1954th. The nurse entered the data and stared at the screen again. I could see from her face that something was confusing her. "Excuse me, are you sure you're Irma Crawley?" That was a strange question. I showed her my passport. "Yes, of course I am. What's this about?" She took the passport, scrutinized the photo and data, then looked at the computer screen again. "You see, there's a record in the system that you refused the operation. Your daughter was recorded in the refusal column yesterday." "What daughter? I don't understand." "I don't have a daughter, only a son." The nurse blinked confusedly. "What do you mean you don't have a daughter?" "Then who came the day before yesterday?" "A young woman in her 30s said she was your daughter and that you had changed your mind about the operation." My heart started beating faster. Some woman came to the hospital, introduced herself as my daughter, and refused the surgery? Who would that be? "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to stay calm. "I never had a daughter, and I didn't send anyone to refuse the operation. On the contrary, I waited 6 months for this opportunity." The nurse looked completely confused. She looked at the computer again, then at me, then back at the computer. "Just a moment, please. I'll be right with you." She picked up the phone and made a call. "Dr. Paxton, I have a situation with patient Crowley. Can you come down to the emergency room for a minute?" I stood at the counter, feeling my insides tighten with anxiety. What's going on? Who would come to the hospital and refuse my surgery? And why was this woman calling herself my daughter? The line behind me was growing, and people were getting impatient. Some coughed, some quietly resented the delay. But I couldn't move until I found out what was going on. 5 minutes later, Dr. Paxton approached the counter. A tall, gray-haired man in his mid-50s, whom I'd met several times before for consultations. When he saw me, he raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Mrs. Crowley, why are you here? Your daughter told me you were refusing surgery." "Dr. Paxton, I don't have a daughter," I repeated for the umpteenth time. "Just my son Dwayne. And I didn't send anyone to refuse surgery." The doctor frowned and looked at the nurse. "Maria, show me the record of the refusal." The nurse turned the monitor so the doctor could see the screen. He read some information carefully, then looked at me again. It says here that your daughter came in around 2 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon. She called herself Charlene Crowley. Said you'd changed your mind about the surgery and asked me to give you an official waiver. She filled out the paperwork and left her signature. Charlene Crowley. I felt the ground slipping from under my feet. Daughter-in-law, my son's wife. She came here, claimed to be my daughter, and refused to operate on my behalf. Can I see those documents? I could barely squeeze them out. Dr. Paxton nodded to the nurse, and she typed something on the keyboard. A minute later, a sheet of paper came out of the printer. The doctor took it and held it out to me. At the top of the sheet was printed, "Refusal of medical intervention." Below that was the text that the patient, Irma Crowley, was refusing elective mitral valve replacement surgery for personal reasons. At the end was a signature, sprawling, confident. Charlene always wrote like that. I stood there with that sheet in my hands and couldn't believe what was happening. My own sister-in-law, wife of my only son, had come to the hospital and robbed me of the surgery that could have saved my life. "Mrs. Crowley, are you feeling well?" Dr. Paxton asked, looking at my probably very pale face. "Would you like to sit down?" I nodded and he took me to a chair in the waiting area. The nurse brought a glass of water. "So, what do we do now?" I asked when I regained a little bit of consciousness. "Is the surgery canceled?" "Technically, yes," the doctor replied. "But if you confirm that you did not send anyone and want to be treated yourself, we can try to restore you to the list. I don't know if we'll be able to find a place anytime soon, though." "Doctor, I've been waiting 6 months for this surgery. You said yourself that you can't put it off." "I understand. Let me talk to the head of the department and see what we can do. In the meantime, fill out a statement saying that the previous denial was filed without your knowledge." He gave me a form, and I began to fill in the boxes with a trembling hand. Last name, first name, date of birth, address. In the column, reason for application, I wrote, "Please restore me to the list for surgery. The refusal was filed by my sister-in-law without my knowledge and consent." As I wrote, the same questions kept running through my mind. Why did Charlene do this? Why didn't she want me to have the surgery? And most importantly, did Dwayne know about it? I thought back to our phone conversation yesterday, his strange reaction to the news of the surgery, the questions about the money, and Charlene's voice in the background, frustrated and annoyed. It all made sense now. They didn't want me to spend the money on treatment, money that was supposed to go to them when I died. So Charlene decided to take the initiative. I finished filling out the document and gave it to Dr. Paxton. He read it carefully and nodded. "Good. I'll go to the supervisor and we'll see what we can do. In the meantime, you wait here." He left, and I stayed in the waiting room, clutching my purse and trying to make sense of what had happened. Normal hospital life was going on around me. Patients came and went. Nurses hurried through the corridors. Phones rang and doctors' voices were heard somewhere in the distance. And I sat in the center of all this hustle and bustle and felt utterly alone. My own son, whom I had born and raised, to whom I had given the best years of my life, had betrayed me in the most despicable way. He had allowed his wife to deprive me of treatment, or perhaps he himself had initiated the story. Tears came to my eyes, but I held back. I couldn't cry now. I had to think about what to do next, how to live with that knowledge, and what to do with the people I thought of as family. Dr. Paxton returned a half hour later. I could tell by the look on his face that the news wasn't good. He sat down next to me in the chair and sighed. "Mrs. Crowley, I've spoken to the head of the department and the hospital administration. It's a complicated situation. Technically, the surgical waiver was properly signed and sealed. Your daughter-in-law introduced herself as your daughter, showed her passport under the name of Crawley, and said she was acting at your request. But it's clear now that it's a fraud," I objected. "She defrauded your staff." Yes, of course she did, and we're ready to reinstate you on the surgery list. The problem is that your spot has already been given to another patient. The next opportunity won't come for another patient for at least 4 months. 4 months. I felt my heart skip a beat. 4 months of waiting when every day could be your last. 4 months of living with this chest pain and constant shortness of breath. Isn't there anything we can do? Maybe there's a place sooner. I'll keep a close eye on the lists. If anyone refuses or has surgery, I'll call you right away. But I can't guarantee anything. You realize your situation is unusual to say the least. Dr. Paxton was silent for a moment, then added, Mrs. Crowley, have you thought about going to the police? What your sister-in-law did is fraud. She posed as someone else and signed documents in someone else's name. The police, I didn't even think about it. Reporting your own family? But what Charlene did was a crime. She could have taken my life by what she did. I'll think about it, I said. What do I do now? Go home? I'm afraid so, but I'll give you my direct phone number. If you feel any deterioration, call me right away, and as soon as it's possible to operate, I'll contact you first. He wrote the phone number on a piece of paper and handed it to me. And one more thing, I think you should have a serious talk with your son. Maybe he didn't know what his wife did, or maybe he can explain to you the motives behind her behavior. I nodded, though my insides ached. What motives could a man have for depriving his mother-in-law of medical care? Only one: money. Charlene was afraid I'd spend too much of what should go to her and Dwayne when I died. Thank you, doctor, for everything. Hang in there, Mrs. Crowley. We're sure we'll find a way to help you. I stood up, picked up my suitcase, and slowly walked toward the hospital exit. The lobby was still bustling with people, doctors and nurses rushing about, elevators running. Life went on, and I walked out of here with the same sick heart I had come in with. Only now the sickness was joined by the realization that the people closest to me had betrayed me. It was cloudy and chilly outside. The November wind rattled the branches of the nearly bare trees. I hailed a cab and waited at the main entrance, trying not to think about anything, just stand there and breathe the cold air. The cab came quickly, the same driver who had brought me in the morning. When he saw me with my suitcase, he raised his eyebrows in surprise. That was fast. Is the operation already over? There was no surgery, I replied briefly. Take me home, please. He must have sensed that it wasn't worth asking, and he remained silent the whole way. I sat in the back seat, staring out the window, trying to decide what to do next. The first thing I had to do was talk to Dwayne, find out if he knew what his wife was about to do. At home, I put the suitcase in the hallway without even opening it. All those things, so carefully selected for the hospital, now seemed unnecessary. I went into the living room and sat down in my favorite chair by the window. Outside the window, the yard was almost empty. Only old Mr. Johnson was walking his dachshund, and Jose the janitor was sweeping the paths. Just an ordinary Friday in an ordinary house, and everything was crumbling inside me. I picked up the phone and dialed Dwayne's office number. I needed to talk to him right away before I changed my mind. Dwayne Crowley speaking, he answered in a businesslike tone. Dwayne, it's Mom. I need to talk to you. It's urgent. Is something wrong? You're supposed to be in the hospital. That's exactly what I want to talk to you about. Can you come home? Now? Mom, I have an important meeting in an hour. How about tonight? Dwayne, I tried to keep my voice as firm as possible. It's very important. It's about your wife. Pause. A long pause, during which I could hear him breathing into the tube. All right, he said at last. I'll be there in half an hour. Half an hour. In that time, I had time to drink a cup of tea and rehearse the upcoming conversation several times. How to start? how to explain to him the horror of the situation, and most importantly, how to react to his answers. Dwayne arrived exactly half an hour later. I heard him parking the car in the yard, then footsteps on the stairs, the doorbell ringing. When I opened it, he was standing on the doorstep in a business suit, with a folder in his hand and a concerned look on his face. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" Come on in. Sit down." He walked into the living room and sat on the couch across from my chair. He put the folder next to him and looked at me closely. "You look upset. Has the surgery been postponed?" "It wasn't postponed. It was canceled. Your wife came to the hospital the day before yesterday and canceled the surgery on my behalf." I said it calmly, without emotion, just stating a fact, and I watched my son's reaction carefully. Dwayne turned pale, then he turned red, then pale again. "What did you say?" "Charlene came to the hospital, introduced herself as my daughter, and signed a waiver for the surgery. Said I'd changed my mind about the treatment." "That can't be true," he breathed out. "You must have gotten something mixed up." "Dwayne, I saw the document with her signature on it. The doctor showed me the entry on the computer. She called herself Charlene Crowley and said she was my daughter." The son was silent, looking at the floor. You could see in his face that he was trying to think of something, to find an explanation for what was happening. Could it be a mistake? A misunderstanding? "What misunderstanding, Dwayne?" "Your wife purposely went to the hospital, cheated the medical staff, and deprived me of an operation that could save my life. Do you realize what that means?" He looked up at me, and I didn't see surprise or indignation as I'd expected. I saw guilt and fear. "Mom, You knew," I said quietly. "You knew she was going to do it." "No." He jumped up off the couch. "I didn't know. She didn't tell me anything." "Don't lie to me, Dwayne. I heard you on the phone when I called to report the surgery. Charlene was in the background saying something about money and renovations." My son stood in the middle of the room, looking like a cornered animal. I felt sorry for him for a second, but only for a second. "She said she was just going to go to the hospital and find out exactly how much the surgery would cost," he finally said. "I didn't know she was going to give up your name." "And if you had?" I asked. "Would you have stopped her?" He was silent again, and that silence was enough for an answer. "I see," I said, and got out of my chair. It all made sense now. "You decided that the operation was too expensive, and I'd rather die saving your money." "Mom, don't say that. We didn't want you to die." "What did you want?" "Explain to me what you wanted by depriving me of medical care." Dwayne sat back down on the couch and covered his face with his hands. "We thought we could wait, find a cheaper clinic, or a state hospital that had a quota." "Dwayne, I've been waiting 6 months for this surgery. The quota for next year has already been allocated, and the cheaper hospitals won't operate on patients my age." I know," he said without raising his head. "It's just that we didn't count on this kind of expense. We've got a mortgage on the house. Charlene wants kids. We'll need more money." "Ah," I said. "So it's about the kids. Charlene wants kids, and that takes money, and a sick old mother-in-law is just getting in the way." "Don't say that." "What am I supposed to say, Dwayne? What do I call a situation where my own son considers my life an obstacle to his well-being?" He raised his head and looked at me. There were tears in his eyes. "Mom, I didn't mean for this to happen. I was just confused. Charlene said that we didn't have that kind of money, that the surgery would eat up all the inheritance our future children should inherit, that you'd already lived a good long life, and we had a family to raise. And you agreed with her. I didn't know she was going to the hospital. I swear to you. I thought we'd just talk to you, explain the situation, ask you to wait. Wait until I died without spending your money on treatment," I finished. Dwayne covered his face with his hands again. His shoulders were shaking. Whether he was crying or just trying to collect his thoughts, I didn't know, and I didn't care. You know, Dwayne, I said quietly, I've spent my whole life thinking I'd raised a good man. Honest, decent, kind. Turns out I was wrong. Mom, please. No, let me finish. I spent the best years of my life working for you, turning down jobs when you were sick, saving on myself to buy you nice clothes and toys. Your father worked 2 jobs to pay for your college education. We dreamed of you becoming a successful man, starting a family, being happy. I walked to the window and looked out at the fall yard. But we never dreamed that our son would see our old age as a burden, that he would calculate how much money he would save on our medical care. He didn't. Dwayne jumped up and came over to me. Mom, I love you. It's just that Charlene and I were confused, scared of spending so much money. You were afraid of spending? I turned to him. I was scared of dying. And it turns out my fear is less important than your financial plans. What happens now? He asked quietly. With the surgery? Now I'll wait another 4 months, if I live, and you and Charlene can plan your family and spend my money on repairs. Mom, maybe we can find another clinic. See what we can do? I looked at my son, the tall, well-dressed man who was supposed to be my support in my old age, and I realized he'd been a stranger for a long time. You know what, Dwayne? Don't bother. I'll figure out what I'm gonna do next. But Mom, that's it. This conversation is over. Tell your wife that her plan succeeded. The operation is canceled. The money is safe. The inheritance is secure. He stood in the middle of the room and didn't know what to say, and I didn't want to hear any more. I was tired. Tired of betrayal, of pain, of disappointment in the people closest to me. Go home, Dwayne. Go home to your wife. Hug each other and rejoice that your sick old mother-in-law won't waste your inheritance anymore. He slowly picked up his folder and walked toward the exit. At the door, he stopped and turned around. Mom, I really didn't mean for this to happen. I know, I replied. You wanted it to happen, but in a different way. You wanted me to refuse treatment and give you my blessing to spend my money. But Charlene was more decisive, taking the initiative. Dwayne walked out, and I heard the door slam, the car start, and then he was gone. The apartment was very quiet. Only the clock on the wall ticked and the water gurgled somewhere in the pipes. I sat down in my chair and looked out the window. It was getting dark outside, though it was still early. November days are short, especially such gray and cloudy ones. Like my life, gray and short. But I'm still alive. And while I'm alive, I can make a difference. After the door closed behind Dwayne, I sat in the chair for a long time, trying to process what had happened. The apartment was silent, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and the distant sounds of the street. Ordinary household sounds that had been soothing before, but now seemed deafening in this new reality where my only son was capable of betrayal. Rage rose in me slowly, like water in a flood. First, just bewilderment and confusion, then the pain of realizing the extent of the deception, and finally, pure, cold anger. Not hysterical, not tearful, but cold anger. The kind of anger that makes you think clearly and make decisions without sentimentality. I stood up and walked through the apartment as if I were seeing it for the first time. This was the living room, where Robert and I hosted guests and celebrated family holidays. Here was the kitchen, where I made dinner for Dwayne when he came to visit. Here's the bedroom with pictures on the nightstand. Our wedding, the birth of our son, his graduation. My whole life was within these walls. And now it turns out that for Dwayne and Charlene, this apartment isn't a childhood home or a place to remember their grandfather. It's just real estate that can be valued in dollars. I remembered the day 5 years ago when Dwayne first brought Charlene over to meet him. At the time, I thought she was just curious about our family. Turns out she was doing inventory, estimating what was worth what could be sold, what could be thrown away. Now that the veil had lifted from my eyes, I began to remember a lot of little things that I hadn't paid attention to before or attributed to innocent reasons. How Charlene was always interested in my financial affairs, asking about my pension, my savings, whether I had any debts. I thought at the time that she was just looking out for my mother-in-law, wanting to make sure I could afford a normal life, or the way she'd looked at the deed to the apartment when I'd asked Dwayne to help me sort out the utility bills. Charlene looked at the title deed very carefully, asking if there were any encumbrances, if the apartment was mortgaged. And then, as if in passing, she asked me if I was thinking of moving to a smaller place because such a large apartment is not necessary for one woman. I replied that this apartment was my home, where I'd lived for 40 years, where my husband had died, where every corner was dear to me. Charlene nodded understandingly, but something unpleasant flashed in her eyes. I realized now that it was annoyance that I wasn't going to voluntarily vacate the place. And then there were those conversations about health that she was always so involved in. She wondered what medications I was taking, how much they cost, whether I went to the doctors often. When I was diagnosed with heart problems, Charlene was the first to talk about how expensive modern medicine is, how good it is that there are government programs for retirees. The main thing is not to overpay for treatment, she said. Private clinics charge 3 times as much for the same services that you can get for free in a state hospital. I agreed with her at the time, thinking that she was a practical woman who knew how to count money. But now I realize that she was preparing the ground. She taught me to think that it was unreasonable to spend a lot on treatment. Especially revealing was a conversation that took place 6 months ago when Dr. Paxton first talked about the need for surgery. I came home upset and called Dwayne and told him about the diagnosis. He came over that evening with Charlene, and we had a long discussion about the situation. Heart surgery is very serious at your age, Charlene said with a concerned look. What are the risks? Did the doctor explain? I told him that there were risks, but that without the operation the condition would only get worse. How much will it cost? She asked. After all, such interventions are very expensive. The doctor said about $50,000. The insurance would cover some of the cost, but you'd have to pay $20,000 out of your own pocket. Charlene whistled. $20,000? That's a lot of money. Are you sure there aren't cheaper options? Charlene, Dwayne urged her, this is about Mom's health. Of course, she agreed hastily. I just think it's worth considering. Maybe it makes sense to get another opinion, or look for a cheaper clinic. Her words seemed reasonable to me then. Really, $20,000 is a lot of money for a retired woman. Maybe I should look for other options. But now I realize that Charlene was already thinking of ways to talk me out of expensive treatment. And then there were the months of waiting for the surgery, during which she kept finding reasons to remind me of the expense. She'd bring me an article about patients being scammed by private clinics. She would tell a story about an acquaintance who spent a lot of money on treatment, but no result, or sympathize with how hard it is to make such serious decisions at my age. It's good that you have time to think, she said. While you're waiting in line, you can weigh the pros and cons. I thought she cared about me, worried about my health and financial situation, but she was methodically setting me up to refuse treatment. But the worst part is that Dwayne supported her, maybe not actively, not openly, but tacitly agreeing with his wife. When she talked about the high cost of medicine, he nodded. When she suggested looking for cheaper options, he didn't object. When she hinted at the risks of surgery at my age, he agreed. My own son, whom I had carried, birthed in agony, breastfed, treated for childhood illnesses, taught to walk and talk, this son thought my life was too expensive a luxury. I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out a calculator. I decided to calculate how much money I had and what would be left after the surgery. I had $78,000 in my savings account, the inheritance from Robert and our combined life savings, plus about $12,000 in the current account. That's $90,000. The surgery cost $20,000. That leaves 70. That's a pretty decent amount of money, enough for a good old age. But for Dwayne and Charlene, $20,000 is a serious loss, especially when you consider that after the surgery, I'll probably need expensive rehabilitation, medication, regular checkups. Or maybe they were counting on the fact that I wouldn't last long without treatment, that my heart would fail in the next few months, and then all the money would go to them, without any medical expenses. The thought seemed so monstrous that I couldn't believe it. Could my son really be capable of such a thing? Could he really wait for me to die, happy that the inheritance would remain intact? But the facts spoke for themselves. Charlene wasn't just talking me out of the surgery, she was actively working to sabotage it. And Dwayne, though unaware of her specific plans, was tacitly supporting the general line of saving money at the expense of my health. I remembered how they'd been acting in the last few months. They visited less and less often, talked more and more coldly, talked more and more about money, and I put it down to busyness, to fatigue, to family problems. I thought they were just going through a difficult period in their relationship, but they were going through a period of waiting for their inheritance. A lot of things make sense now. Why Dwayne had reacted so strangely to the news that the surgery had been cleared. Why there was no joy in his voice, only anxiety. Why Charlene was muttering something unhappily in the background. They were hoping that the surgery wouldn't happen, that I would wait a few more months, and in that time, maybe the problem would resolve itself. And when it became clear that the surgery was going to happen after all, Charlene decided to act. She went to the hospital, and with her own hands, she ruined my chances of recovery. I got up from the table and walked to the window. It was dark outside. The streetlights were on. Lights were on in the windows of the neighboring houses. People were coming home from work, cooking dinner, spending time with their families. Normal, everyday life that suddenly seemed like an unattainable luxury. I don't have a family anymore. There is a son who considers me a burden, and a daughter-in-law who is actively seeking my death. There is an apartment that they view as their property. There is money that they have already mentally spent. But there is one other thing they don't have: my will. As long as I am alive, as long as I can think and make decisions, I don't have to dance to their tune. I don't have to save their inheritance at the cost of my own life. They want my money? Fine, they'll get it, but not in the way they expect. I went into the bedroom and pulled a file out of the closet, the will I'd made 5 years ago, after Robert died. A simple document that transferred the entire estate to the sole heir, Dwayne. It seemed natural and right at the time. Parents leave their children everything they've accumulated in a lifetime, but the children have to earn that inheritance by caring, by loving, by respecting their parents, not by planning their early demise. I put the will on the table and stared at it for a long time. I'll go to the notary tomorrow and change it. Let Dwayne and Charlene learn that money isn't the most important thing in life, and that betrayal comes with a price. Outside the window, the wind rumbled and the first raindrops hit the glass. A storm was brewing, not just on the street, but in my life. I met Saturday morning with a clear head and a firm decision. The night passed with almost no sleep. I lay in the dark and contemplated my future. By dawn, the plan had finally matured. If Dwayne and Charlene wanted my money so badly, they would have it, but not in the way they'd hoped. The first thing I did was call Frederick Winthrop, the notary I'd met 5 years ago when I'd drawn up the will after Robert's death. An elderly, experienced lawyer with an impeccable reputation, he was always correct and professional. "Mrs. Crowley," he said, recognizing my voice. "How are you? What brings you to see me on a Saturday? Mr. Winthrop, I need to change my will. It's urgent. I see. Can you be here by Monday? I have an 11 a.m. opening. No, I need it today. It's very important. There was a pause. Mr. Winthrop must have been surprised at my persistence. I'd always been a patient and compliant customer. All right, he said at last. I can see you at 2 o'clock this afternoon. But tell me, Mrs. Crawley, are you sure it is necessary to do it in such a hurry? A change of will is a serious step that requires thought. Mr. Winthrop, I've been thinking all night. I'm absolutely certain of my decision. After talking to the notary, I sat down at the computer Dwayne had given me 2 years ago for my birthday. Back then, he still cared about me, wanted me to keep up with modern technology, to be able to communicate with friends via email, to search for information on the internet. Ironically, now this computer would help me disinherit him. I opened a search engine and typed in Harrisonburg Realtor Condo Sale. Many offers from various real estate agencies popped up on the screen. I methodically studied the sites, read reviews, compared working conditions. Most of all, I liked the agency, Home Hearth, a small but successful company with good references. On the website, there were photos of employees, their short biographies, examples of successful deals. Everything looked solid and reliable. I called the number given. A woman with a pleasant voice answered the phone. Home Depot Agency, Jennifer Hull speaking. Can I help you? Hello. My name is Irma Crowley, and I'm looking to sell my apartment. Oh, that's wonderful. Where's your apartment located? I told her the address, and Jennifer perked up immediately. Oh, it's a great neighborhood. There's a very good demand for it right now. What's the square footage? How many rooms? 3 rooms, 110 square meters. It's in good condition, renovated 10 years ago. Sounds very attractive. When would you like to meet for an inspection? I have time this afternoon. That's fine. What time would be convenient for you? Say 4. Would that work for you? I agreed and gave Jennifer my address. It was a few hours before the meeting, and I decided to make the most of it. I had to clean up the apartment, put away personal things I shouldn't show to strangers. I started with the photos. There were a lot of them in the house, on the shelves, on the walls, on the nightstands, wedding pictures, Dwayne's baby pictures, family vacations, all of our family's history captured in these images. It was especially painful to look at photos from the last few years. Here's Dwayne and Charlene in our kitchen on the day of their engagement. Here's all of us celebrating New Year's Eve together. Here's a family dinner for my birthday. Back then, I thought we were a happy family, that we had a future, plans, shared joys. And it turns out Charlene was already appraising my assets and making plans to buy them. I put all the photos neatly in a box. Let them remain as a memento of the time when I still believed in love and devotion. Then I put away personal documents, jewelry, trinkets dear to my heart. Everything that could tell about my private life had to remain hidden from the eyes of the realtor and potential buyers. At 2:30, I went to the notary's office. Mr. Winthrop's office was downtown, in an old brick building that housed various law offices. I went up to the 3rd floor and knocked on a familiar door with a sign that read, Frederick Winthrop, Notary Public. Come in, Mrs. Crowley, he said, opening the door. Have a seat. Mr. Winthrop was an elegant man in his 60s, with gray hair and attentive gray eyes. He wore a dark blue suit and a pinstripe tie, the immaculate image of a successful lawyer of the old school. So, he said, sitting down at his massive oak desk, you want to change the will. What exactly are you unhappy with in the current version? Mr. Winthrop, I want to completely rewrite the will. Disinherit my son. The notary raised his eyebrows. That's a very serious decision. May I ask why? I told him the whole story, about the illness, about the operation, about Charlene's action and Dwayne's reaction. Mr. Winthrop listened attentively, asking clarifying questions from time to time. I understand, he said when I finished. Indeed, the behavior of your son and his wife seems highly unethical, but I must warn you, disinheritance can be challenged in court, and if I sell the apartment and spend all the money in my lifetime, that's your right. No one can forbid you to dispose of your own property. Then that's exactly what I'll do. Mr. Winthrop nodded. In that case, I suggest that you make a new will stating that all of your property, whatever it may be at the time of your death, goes to a person or organization of your choice. I haven't decided exactly to whom. Can I change it later? Of course, a will can be rewritten as many times as you like. It took us about an hour to draw up a new document. I specified that the entire estate be given to a charity of my choice, which will be made by a supplemental decree. Until that order is made, I have no heirs. When everything was ready, Mr. Winthrop once more suggested that I think about it. Mrs. Crawley, perhaps you should try talking to your son again. Explain to him how you perceived his behavior. Family conflicts can sometimes be resolved. Mr. Winthrop, some behavior is unforgivable. My son allowed my wife to deny me medical care. That is not a conflict that can be resolved by conversation. The notary nodded with understanding. Then, good luck to you. And be careful. It is possible that your son will try to challenge your actions. Let him try. I have a doctor's certificate that I'm legally competent, witnesses to my decisions, and most importantly, I have the right to control my own life. I went home from the notary. My mind was spinning with different thoughts, but a feeling of relief prevailed. The first step had been taken. Now, Dwayne wouldn't get a penny after my death. At exactly 4 o'clock, the doorbell rang. On the threshold stood a young woman of about 35 in an elegant business suit with a briefcase in her hand and a professional smile on her face. Mrs. Crowley, I'm Jennifer Hulse from the Homewood Agency. Please come in. Jennifer was a pleasant, energetic woman who got right to work. She methodically inspected all the rooms, making notes in her notebook, taking photos of particularly good angles. The apartment is in excellent condition, she said when she finished. It has a good layout, quality finishes, and a great view from the windows. There's a lot of demand in this neighborhood right now. And how much can it cost? Preliminary. I would estimate it at $280,000. The final price will be determined after a professional appraisal. This amount pleasantly surprised me. I expected to get much less. And how fast can you sell it? With the right submission to the market, in 2 or 3 months. If you want to sell faster, you can reduce the price by 10 to 15% and find a buyer in a month. 2 months would be fine with me. We discussed the details of cooperation, signed the contract. Jennifer explained that within a week they would prepare all the documents, take professional photos, and place ads on all the major sites. Can I ask? She asked before leaving. Are you moving to another city? Something like that, I answered evasively. I wanted a change of scenery. After the realtor left, I sat down at the computer again. Now I had to decide where to spend the money from the sale of the apartment. I remembered what Charlene had said about finding a smaller place for me. Oh, great. We'll find a smaller place, but not as small as she had envisioned. I started looking for information on nursing homes and assisted living facilities. Not the usual state-run facilities, but elite private facilities that provide a comfortable and dignified old age. My search took me far beyond Harrisonburg. I looked at offers in California, Florida, North Carolina, places where you can live by the sea, enjoy a good climate and quality medical care. I was especially interested in the Golden Shores complex in California, near San Diego. On the website, there were pictures of beautiful cottages buried in greenery, overlooking the ocean. Each resident received a separate apartment with all amenities, and the complex employed nurses, cooks, maids, and recreational organizers. The cost of living was $5,000 a month, plus an entrance fee of $150,000. This money guaranteed a lifetime of full service housing, medical care, and food. I did the math. $270,000 from the sale of the apartment, plus $90,000 in savings, for a total of $360,000, minus $150,000 for the entrance fee. That leaves $210,000. With monthly expenses of $5,000, this money is enough for more than 3 years, and in 3 years, you can do a lot of things. Make surgery in a good private clinic, restore health, live at your pleasure by the sea, away from ungrateful relatives. I found the phone number of Golden Coast and, despite the time difference, decided to call. A pleasant woman with a slight accent answered at the other end of the line. Welcome to the Golden Shores. My name is Patricia Stone. I'm an account manager. How can I help you? Hi. I'm interested in moving into your complex. That's great. Where are you calling from? I'm calling from Harrisonburg, Virginia. Oh, I see. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Age, health, special needs? I told Patricia about my situation without going into details about my family problems. I mentioned my heart condition, the need for expert medical attention. We have an excellent medical team, Patricia said. A cardiologist, a general practitioner, nurses with a lot of experience, and we have one of the best clinics in California 10 minutes away for any kind of treatment. What are the requirements for admission? Pretty simple. Age from 65 years, a certificate of legal capacity, a medical report on the absence of serious mental disorders, and, of course, financial guarantees. How long does it take to formalize? If all the documents are ready, about a month. But we have vacancies right now, so we can process your application pretty quickly. We agreed that Patricia would send me a package of documents by email, and I would study all the details and make a final decision. After the conversation, I sat at the computer for a long time, studying the Golden Shores website. The pictures were just great. Well-groomed territory with palm trees and flowering bushes, cozy apartments with terraces, dining room with panoramic windows, swimming pool, library, rooms for various activities. It was exactly what I needed. A beautiful, peaceful place where I could live the rest of my life with dignity. A place where no one would consider me a burden or a nuisance to my family's well-being. And Dwayne and Charlene will get what they deserve, an empty apartment with a paid-off mortgage and utility bills. Let them enjoy their inheritance. It was starting to rain outside the window. Large drops were beating on the glass, turning into streams. But this rain didn't seem dull to me. On the contrary, it was washing away the old life, preparing the place for a new one. Tomorrow's Sunday. Dwayne promised to visit me in the hospital, but since I didn't make it to the hospital, maybe he'll come home. I wonder what he'll say when he finds out about my plans. Then again, maybe I won't tell him anything. Let him find out later, when it's too late to make a change. Let him feel the same way I felt when I found out I was canceling the surgery. Betrayal comes with a price, and that price will be paid in full. Sunday was cloudy and rainy. I woke up early, around 7 a.m., and couldn't go back to sleep. I lay in bed and listened to the wind outside the window, driving water streams across the roofs. Usually this kind of weather made me feel sad and wistful, but today I felt surprisingly calm. Maybe because, for the first time in months, I had clarity about what was going on in my life and what I was going to do about it. After breakfast, I sat down at the computer and scrutinized the documents Patricia had sent from Gold Coast. The contract looked quite standard. It described in detail the living conditions, medical care, food, leisure programs. Particular attention was attracted by the condition that in case of death of a resident, All his personal property in the complex becomes the property of the institution if there are no other orders. That suited me just fine. So even the things I'd take with me from the apartment wouldn't go to Dwayne and Charlene. Justice would finally be served. I printed out the application form and started filling it out. The procedure was fairly simple: basic personal information, health information, and financial guarantees. The application had to be accompanied by a doctor's certificate, a copy of my passport, bank documents, and recommendations from 2 people. I have no problem with references. You can ask Mr. Winthrop and Dr. Paxton, but the doctor's certificate would have to be a special one with a statement of capacity. About 11 o'clock in the morning, the telephone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I picked it up. Hello, is this Irma Crawley? Yes, I'm listening. Hello, this is Jennifer from the real estate agency. I have good news. I've already received 2 serious inquiries about your apartment. One from a young family looking for a place in your neighborhood, the other from an investor. Could we schedule viewings for tomorrow or Tuesday? Sure, I agreed. What's needed on my end? Just to keep the apartment in the same order as yesterday. And be ready to answer buyers' questions about the house, the neighborhood, the utilities. We set a date for tomorrow, Monday, 2:00 in the afternoon. Jennifer promised to call ahead and give me a heads up on the exact time. After talking to the realtor, I felt my heart race, not from excitement, but from anticipation. Everything was starting to materialize. A few more weeks, and I would be free of this place, of the memories of betrayal, of having to see the faces of people who dreamed of my death. At 3:30, the doorbell rang. I looked out the window and saw Dwayne's familiar car in the yard. There were 2 figures standing beside it, a tall man in a dark coat and a woman in a red jacket. So the 2 of them had arrived together. Interesting. Charlene rarely accompanied her husband on his visits to me. She usually found an excuse to stay home, work, fatigue, meeting with friends. And now she's suddenly decided to join me. Apparently, he wanted to see for himself that the operation had failed. I opened the door and saw my son and his wife at the door. Dwayne looked tired and tense, with dark shadows under his eyes. Charlene, on the other hand, seemed alert and even a little excited. She was holding a box of chocolates and a bouquet of chrysanthemums. Hi, Mom, Dwayne said, kissing me awkwardly on the cheek. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Come on in, I said dryly. Take off your shoes. They took off their shoes in the hallway and walked into the living room. Charlene looked around quickly but carefully, as if checking to make sure everything was in place. We brought you candy and flowers, she said with ostentatious care. We thought you might need cheering up after the hospital. Thank you, I said coldly. Put the flowers in the vase in the kitchen. While Charlene fiddled with the bouquet, Dwayne sat down on the couch and looked at me carefully. Mom, how did the surgery go? I called the hospital yesterday, but they said you weren't there. He knew. Of course he knew that the surgery was a bust. Why else would he call the hospital? There was no surgery, I said calmly. It turned out that someone had refused treatment on my behalf. Dwayne turned pale, and the sound of breaking glass came from the kitchen. Apparently, Charlene had dropped a vase. Is everything all right? Dwayne shouted toward the kitchen. Yeah, the vase just slipped, Charlene replied. You could hear the tension in her voice. So, what happened to the operation? Dwayne continued to ask, even though we both knew the answer. Your wife came to the hospital and signed a waiver on my behalf. She introduced herself as my daughter and told me I'd changed my mind about the treatment. Charlene returned to the living room with a bouquet in her hands. She hadn't put the flowers in water. She must have broken the vase and didn't know what to do with them. What are you talking about? She asked innocently. About you going to St. Mary's on Wednesday and refusing my surgery, I said, looking her straight in the eye. Charlene's face changed instantly. Gone was the ostentatious concern, the fake smile. In its place was an expression of cold calculation. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice sounded uncertain. Charlene, that's enough, Dwayne said tiredly. Mom knows everything. What do I know? I turned to him. Know what? We wanted to talk to you. Explain the situation, my son began. We're in a difficult financial situation right now. The loan on the house, plans for the family. We thought we could postpone the surgery until we're out of debt. So, your wife went to the hospital and lied to the doctors? I didn't cheat, Charlene flared up. I just said you wanted to wait for the surgery. It wasn't deception. It was a reasonable precaution. You pretended to be my daughter and signed documents in someone else's name. That's fraud. Charlene threw her hair back and straightened up. The mask of the caring daughter-in-law had finally fallen off. Okay, let's say I did it. So what? Somebody's got to take care of the family. You were going to spend $20,000 on a surgery with no known outcome. At your age, any anesthesia could be your last. Charlene, Dwayne snapped at her. Charlene, what? I'm telling the truth. She turned to me. You've already lived your life. 70 years is more than enough. And we have children ahead of us, their education, our future. Why waste our inheritance on dubious medical procedures? I listened to her words and marveled at my own calmness. I guess this is what I subconsciously expected to hear. Finally, all the cards were out in the open. I see, I said. So it's about the inheritance. Of course it's about the inheritance. Charlene couldn't hold back any longer. Don't you think we know how much money you have? Dwayne told me about your savings, about Robert's insurance, almost $100,000. That's enough for a down payment on a better house, a car for me, daycare for the kids. And you want to blow it all on doctors. Charlene, shut up. Dwayne tried to stop his wife, but it was too late. I will not shut up. I'm sick of playing the loving daughter-in-law. She turned to her husband. You said yourself that the operation was too expensive, that we need the money more than she does. I didn't tell you to go to the hospital and give up her name. You didn't stop me when I said I was gonna do it. They started to argue among themselves, and I took advantage of the pause to say what I'd started this whole conversation for. You know what? I said loudly, and they both fell silent. I have news for you. Dwayne and Charlene looked at me warily. I sold the apartment yesterday. There was dead silence. The only sounds were the sound of rain outside the window and the sound of a car passing somewhere in the distance. What did you say? Dwayne whispered. I sold the apartment. Actually, I signed a contract with a realtor. Showings to prospective buyers start tomorrow. Charlene turned so pale that she looked like a wax figure. It can't be, she said. It could be, and it very well could. The contract has been signed. The apartment is for sale at $270,000. But, but why? Dwayne looked confused. Where are you going to move? To a nursing home in California. It's a very nice place, right by the ocean. I'll spend all my money there, both from the sale of the apartment and my savings, for a comfortable old age for myself. Charlene jumped up from the couch. You have no right. It's our inheritance. Whose inheritance? I asked calmly. Ours, Dwayne's, your son, my son who let you deny me medical care, the son who thinks my life is too precious. He's your only child. Who else would you leave your estate to? No one. I will spend it all in my lifetime, on myself, on my health, on my pleasure. Charlene was running around the room like a hunted animal. I won't allow it. You can't do this. It's our money. It's my money, I emphasized, earned by my husband and me, and I have every right to use it as I see fit. But we've been counting on it. We had plans. She turned to her husband. Dwayne, say something. Stop her. Dwayne sat on the couch and stared at the floor. His shoulders slumped, and he looked like a man who had just been hit on the head with a hammer. Mom, he said quietly, not looking up, what if we apologize? If Charlene apologized for what she did? Dwayne, do you think an apology can erase betrayal? But we're family. Family? I got up and went to the window. Dwayne, family is when people who are close to each other support each other in times of need, not planning how to save money on a relative's medical care. We didn't want you to die. We did. Maybe not consciously, but we did, because my death would have solved all your financial problems. Charlene suddenly stopped pacing and stopped in the middle of the room. All right, she said with cold fury. You want to play the noble game? You'll die alone in your nursing home, and no one will even come to the funeral. Charlene, Dwayne jumped up. Charlene, what? Let her know what's in store for us. I won't let you waste your time with that ungrateful old woman. She threw us out of her life, so we'll throw her out of ours. She grabbed her purse and headed for the exit. And don't think we're going to let you get away with it. We'll find a way to contest the sale of the apartment. We'll prove that you're out of your mind. Try, I said calmly. I have a psychiatrist's certificate of full legal capacity. I got it yesterday. It was a lie. I'd planned to get it next week, but Charlene believed it, and then she was even more furious. Bitch, she shouted and ran out of the apartment. Dwayne slowly got up from the couch. Mom, Go get your wife, I said without turning around. She needs your support. I don't. Can't we talk more when things settle down? I don't think so, Dwayne. Some things can't be fixed by talking. He stood there for a minute, then sighed and walked toward the exit. Mom, I really love you. I know, I said, but you love money more. After they left, the apartment became very quiet. I picked up the bouquet of chrysanthemums Charlene had thrown in a fit of anger and put it in the trash. Then I put away the box of chocolates I'd give to my neighbor, Mrs. Dalton. In the kitchen were the shards of a broken vase. I picked them up carefully and threw them away. That vase was a wedding present from my sister. It's a shame, of course, but it's no big deal. I would need very different things in my new life. The rain continued to pour outside the window, but it didn't seem dreary to me anymore. It was a cleansing rain that washes away everything unnecessary and superfluous. Tomorrow starts a new week, and I will take another step towards my freedom. Dwayne and Charlene got what they wanted. Honesty. I honestly told them what I thought of their act and what I was going to do in response. Now they know the price of their betrayal. And rightly so. The next 2 months flew by like a kaleidoscope. Events replaced each other with dizzying speed, and each day brought new changes in my life. For the first time in many years, I felt like the master of my own destiny, not a passive victim of circumstances. The apartment sold faster than Jennifer expected. 3 weeks after that Sunday conversation with Dwayne and Charlene, we signed a sales contract with a young family of doctors who were moving to Harrisonburg from New York. Nice, educated people who immediately fell in love with the condo and offered full price with no haggling. Dr. Harris and his wife Susan looked at every room with such admiration, it was as if they were in a museum. They were especially impressed with the kitchen overlooking the park and the large living room with high ceilings. It has such a warm atmosphere, Susan said, standing by the bedroom window. It feels like a happy home. Yes, I replied. The best years of my life were spent here, and it was true, until the moment I realized what I meant to my family. The money from the sale of the apartment came into my account in the first days of January, $272,000 after all commissions and taxes. Together with my savings, the total amount was $362,000. But even before the condo deal was finalized, I took care of my health. Dr. Paxton helped me find a private clinic in Richmond that was willing to perform heart surgery. The cost was higher than St. Mary's $35,000, but I didn't have to wait in line. "Mrs. Crowley," said the surgeon, Dr. Bentley, after studying my tests, "frankly, you've delayed treatment. The condition of the valve has worsened during these months of waiting, but surgery is still possible, and the prognosis is generally favorable." The surgery was scheduled for January 15th. I was in a private room overlooking a snowy garden. I was surrounded by attentive nurses, and the doctors made regular rounds. No one considered my treatment a waste of money. No one hinted at my age or the dubiousness of the results. Here I was, just a patient to be treated. The surgery lasted 4 hours. When I woke up in the ICU, the first thing I felt was ease of breathing. The air flowed freely into my lungs without the usual heaviness and pain. My heart was beating smoothly and calmly, without skipping beats or freezing from the strain. "Everything went fine," Dr. Bentley said, checking my pulse. "The valve has been replaced and circulation is back to normal. In a week or two, you'll feel 10 years younger." He was right. Within a week, I could walk up the stairs without stopping at every step. The constant shortness of breath was gone. The pain in my chest was gone. My body felt as if it had come back to life after a long sleep. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital. During that time, Dwayne called 3 times. The first time was to find out if it was true that I'd sold the apartment. The second was to try to talk me into postponing my move to California. The third was just to talk, as he put it. "Mom," he said during the last conversation, "maybe we can meet when you get out of the hospital. I want to apologize for what happened." "Dwayne," I replied, lying in my hospital bed and looking out the window. "Apologizing won't bring back the months I spent waiting for surgery, and it won't change the fact that you let your wife deprive me of medical care." "But I didn't know she was going to the hospital." "Yes, you did. Maybe not the specific act, but the intent. You knew Charlene was against my treatment, and you didn't stop her." "Mom, please." "Dwayne, I'm not mad at you. I just don't want to do business with you anymore. It's different." He kept saying something else, but I wasn't listening. I just hung up and asked the nurse not to connect me to that number anymore. While I was being treated in Richmond, Patricia from Golden Shores finalized my admission to their facility. The paperwork was ready. The place was reserved. The admission fee was transferred. All that remained was to arrive and check in. I was discharged from the hospital on January 28th, the same day I flew to California. The ticket was first class, so that the flight would be as comfortable as possible after the surgery. In the cabin of the airplane, I looked out the window at the clouds below and thought about how dramatically my life had changed in 2 months. Back in November, I was a sick, lonely woman who depended on the mercy of an ungrateful family. Now I am a healthy, financially independent retiree who is flying to a new life by the ocean. I was greeted at the San Diego airport by Patricia, an energetic woman of 45 with a warm smile and professional manners. "Mrs. Crowley, how was your flight? How are you feeling after the surgery?" "Fine," I replied, "ready for my new life." "That's great. Then let's go see your new home." Golden Shores exceeded all my expectations. The complex was located on a hill overlooking the Pacific Ocean, surrounded by palm trees and flowering gardens. Small Mediterranean-style cottages were scattered throughout the area so that each resident had privacy but still maintained a sense of community. My apartment was on the second floor of one of the cottages. Spacious living room with kitchenette, bedroom, bathroom, and a large terrace with sea views. The furniture was modern but cozy, in pastel colors. There were wicker chairs and a small table on the terrace, perfect for morning coffee to the sound of the ocean. Breakfast is served in the common dining room from 8 to 10 in the morning, Patricia told me as she showed me around the apartment. But you have your own kitchen if you want to cook. Lunch and dinner are also in the dining room, but that's optional. She walked me around the entire complex, a library with thousands of books and comfortable reading chairs, a spa with a pool, jacuzzi, and massage rooms, a medical center with a general practitioner, a cardiologist, and 2 nurses, creative studios for painting, ceramics, and music. And this is our pride, Patricia said as she opened the door to a large hall with panoramic windows. The main dining room. It has the most beautiful view of the ocean. I walked to the window and froze. The vast blue of the Pacific Ocean, the white lambs of the waves, seagulls soaring over the water. The sun was setting, coloring the sky shades of pink and gold. Beautiful, I breathed out. Every sunset here is a work of art. Patricia agreed. Many of our tenants say it's why they moved in. In the evening, I sat on my terrace with a cup of tea and listened to the sound of the surf. It was deep winter in Harrisonburg. Snowing and cold winds were blowing. Here the air was warm and humid, smelling of salt and jasmine. I pulled out my cell phone and looked at the screen. 2 missed calls from Dwayne. Apparently, he'd found out I'd left. Probably trying to call to ask me one last time not to go so far away. But I didn't want to talk to him anymore. That chapter of my life is closed. I now had a new home, new surroundings, new opportunities. The next day, I made an appointment with the complex's cardiologist, Dr. Ryan Harper. A young but experienced physician, she carefully reviewed my medical history and the results of my surgery. Great job, she said as she reviewed the scans. Whoever operated on you is a master. Now your heart is working like clockwork. With the right lifestyle and regular checkups, you can live a long and active life. And what does proper lifestyle mean? Moderate physical activity, walking, swimming, yoga, a healthy diet, avoiding stress, in fact, all of the things that we offer here. Dr. Harper put together a personalized rehabilitation program for me, morning walks on the ocean, pool sessions, calisthenics, plus regular checkups and tests to monitor my condition. And also, she added with a smile, I recommend that you find something to do. Creativity, hobbies, socializing with interesting people. There are a lot of wonderful people with a lot of life experience living here. She was right. Former teachers, doctors, engineers, artists lived in Golden Shores. People who had lived interesting lives and were now enjoying a well-deserved vacation. At lunch, I met Elizabeth, a former librarian from Seattle, and Frank, a retired naval officer. We quickly found common topics of conversation. Within a week of moving in, I realized that I felt at home for the first time in years, not in the sense of where I lived, but in the sense of inner peace. No one here considered me a burden. No one was calculating my worth or planning my death. I was just Irma Crowley, a woman entitled to a dignified old age. Dwayne called several more times. I rejected the first calls, but then I decided to talk to him one last time. Mom, you finally answered. I could hear the relief in his voice. How are you? How's your health? I'm fine, thank you. The surgery was a success. Thank God. Where are you now? They told me you left Harrisonburg. I'm in California, at that nursing home you were talking about. Mom, why don't I fly down to see you? We'll talk. We'll talk things through. No need, Dwayne. I have a different life now. But I'm your son. We have shared memories, shared history. The story ended the day your wife went to the hospital to refuse my surgery, and you let her. Mom, I'm sorry. Charlene and I realized how wrong we'd been. Dwayne, you didn't realize what you did was wrong. You realized that your actions had consequences. That's different. There was a pause on the phone. So, you'll never forgive me? Dwayne, forgiveness is when a person has done something wrong but has made amends. And you didn't. You're just upset that you lost your inheritance. That's not true. Then answer me honestly. If I hadn't sold the apartment and moved away, if I just had the surgery and come home, would you have changed your attitude toward me? Would you stop seeing my medical expenses as a drain on the family budget? He didn't say anything, and that silence was enough of an answer. Take care of yourself, Dwayne. Live happily ever after with your wife and future children. Mom, wait. I disconnected the phone and never answered his calls again. Now, 3 months later, I'm sitting on the terrace of my apartment watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean. Tomorrow morning, I'll go to yoga. Then I'll do ceramics in my creative studio. In the afternoon, I have an appointment with Dr. Harper for a routine checkup. I still have over $200,000 left in my checking account. With my lifestyle, that's enough money to last me for years to come. And if my health takes a turn for the worse, there's excellent medical care here. Dwayne got what he wanted. I'm no longer spending his inheritance on my medical care, but not exactly the way he planned. And I got something I didn't expect to find at 70, a new life full of peace and dignity. A life where I am valued as a person, not valued as an expense item. The ocean rumbles outside my window. Seagulls screech over the water, and I know that tomorrow will be another beautiful day. And I don't need to ask anyone for permission to live it.